I can't believe it. It's happened again to Fernando Alonso. By far the biggest story of preseason testing was Aston Martin and their disappointing start with Honda as the team experienced disastrous reliability issues which already threatened to derail their entire 2026 season. I don't think that it's an over-exaggeration to say that what we saw from Aston Martin was an embarrassment. This is an established team with all of the resources in the world. Stroll, Newey, Alonso, Honda, all of the big names are involved. And yet, they failed to even match what newcomers Cadillac were able to do, which makes it all the more ironic given that part of the reason why F1 was so against the Cadillac project in the first place was out of fear that they would be an embarrassing backmarker, making themselves look bad and bringing the sport into disrepute. Right from the start of testing, there were red flags when Aston Martin turned up late to the Barcelona shakedown and only got their car out on Thursday, meaning that they couldn't use up their full 3 days of allocated running. That in itself, however, wasn't a disaster. Williams on paper looked to be in an even worse position, as they couldn't attend the Barcelona shakedown entirely. What really rang alarm bells, however, is the fact that when Aston Martin did eventually hit the track, Lance Stroll managed just 6 laps before the car broke down. And then even on the Friday, although Fernando was able to do 61 laps, the car had to be run with a reduced engine mode and was limited to a constant speed on the straights. The next warning came of the car's official launch on the eve of Bahrain testing. Although we didn't know the extent of their issues at the time, it was already telling that the team was heavily playing down expectations for the season, saying that for them it was going to be all about the long game. Given that internally, the team probably knew that they were in real trouble. Adrian's subsequent comments about why the team was late to Barcelona probably had an element of preemptive damage control with the knowledge that they were going to struggle in Bahrain. The reality is that we didn't get a model of the 26 car in the wind tunnel until mid-April, whereas most, if not all of our rivals would have had a model in the wind tunnel from the moment the 2026 aero testing ban ended at the beginning of January last year. That put us on the back foot by about 4 months, which has meant a very, very compressed research and design cycle. The car only came together at the last minute, which is why we were fighting to make it to the Barcelona shakedown. The reason why the team was 4 months behind compared it to everyone else was because Adrian was only able to start officially at Aston Martin in March of 2025, despite the fact that there would have been engineers researching and designing elements of the 26 car, even going back to 2024. The team must have taken a conscious choice to not corner themselves conceptually with any definitive design choices or begin any wind tunnel testing until Newey got there and could begin to put his print on the AR26 and what he wants the concept direction to be. To me, this was definitely an unfortunate consequence. If you hire Adrian Newey, it is totally understandable to give him total control over the development direction. And there is no point in wasting wind tunnel time with the ATR restrictions, even if you know that you're going to put yourself under pressure by compressing your design cycle. With all of that being said, I still don't think even Aston Martin could have predicted just how bad Bahrain testing would be with 6 days of running available to them across 2 weeks. On week 1, Lance Stroll made major headlines by involuntarily confirming that the team was 4.5 seconds slower than the front runners, and whilst at first he could have been accused of hyperbole, this was then confirmed by ex-F1 driver and team representative Pedro de Rosa, and nobody's happy when you're seconds slower than expected. But it's also true that nobody's worried. There is a lack of grip and power. As Lance said, we are 3, 4, or 5 seconds behind. But that is not the most important thing right now. Things, however, during week 2 went from bad to disastrous. On day 1, Lance suffered an engine issue which dropped his revs during the braking phase and sent his car spinning into the gravel. Then on day 2, Fernando suffered a battery-related issue which shut the car down and left him stranded, which once again ended their entire day early. Going into the final day, it was very telling that it was Honda and not Aston Martin who released a statement online saying that due to the number of reliability issues, the team no longer had enough spare parts to rebuild the power unit if something else went wrong. And so Honda decided to limit the team's running to just short stint to gather data with 30-minute intervals in between. However, even that did not happen. On the final day, Lance managed just 6 untimed installation laps before the team finally ended their disastrous preseason. Across Barcelona and Bahrain, Aston Martin were the only team who were incapable of doing 100 laps during a single day. It won't come as a surprise that they were also the slowest in Bahrain, but even the scale of their deficit was alarming. Compared to Cadillac, who were the next slowest, their best lap time, which was set by Lance Stroll, was almost 7 to 10 slower than the best lap time done by Valtteri Bottas. Looking at the wider Honda context and comparing it to their time with McLaren in total, did on average 2:48.8 km per day. That is more than what Honda managed during their first preseason testing in 2015 when they averaged just 1:45.8 km per day, but it's almost identical to their next disastrous preseason in 2017 when they did 2:47.5 km per day. The lack of mileage created a snowball effect for Aston Martin. When Honda suffers a problem, it costs the team vital learning time in terms of how to best extract performance out of the brand new power units. There is so much nuance that the drivers have had to learn, and they've essentially had to recalibrate how to drive a Formula One car over a lap, and also race distance with these brand new PUS. When is the best time to deploy and recharge energy? Or what is the most efficient energy management strategy? And what is the best way to recharge energy without inducing instability and locking into corners? All of this knowledge and experience are things that the Aston Martin drivers just don't have. And that is not even mentioning the complicated start procedure, which in itself has been a massive learning curve for every team on the grid. It goes without saying that we have no clue what the potential of the AMR26 even is. This package is so immature and so compromised that the beginning of this season for Aston Martin is just going to be an extended preseason. If they make it to the end of the Australian Grand Prix, then that in itself will be progress for Honda, and it will generate a huge amount of data and learning for the team. What still excites me about the AMR26, however, is that despite the fact that going into the season, it is currently the worst car on the grid, that car penned by Adrian just doesn't look like your typical underdeveloped back of the grid no-hoper. The side pods are tightly packaged. The rear suspension with its high mounting points is unique on the grid, but at the moment, the power unit simply isn't refined enough to be competitive. It's important at this point to emphasize that whilst the first order problem is almost certainly the Honda power units, judging from what the drivers have said and how the car looked on track when it actually was able to run, there is also clearly problems on the chassis and drivability side, as well with how the package has been integrated. In a bid to become a fully independent manufacturer team, Aston Martin for 26 have completely distanced themselves from sharing any parts with Mercedes, and this has meant that a wide range of new elements are only now coming together for the very first time. There is the Honda power unit, the first Adrian Newey designed chassis, their first ever in-house gearbox. Added to that, their own bespoke rear suspension to complement the gearbox. And there is also another element which we haven't even seen yet, and that is the Aramco sustainable fuel. What effect that will have on the performance and reliability of the Honda PU is yet to be determined. Honda has attributed their reliability problems to what they call abnormal vibrations that are damaging the battery. However, the root cause of these vibrations has not yet been identified. If we could identify a single cause, it would be easier to fix. But because multiple linked factors generate the vibration, we don't know whether fixing just one will solve it. There is a possibility it takes time. Another issue that was clear is that Honda is also struggling with cooling, as the engine cover featured noticeably bigger cooling gills compared to the other teams. The problem is that these gills are detrimental to performance because they produce a lot of drag, and teams are always trying to find that balance between getting the right level of cooling without sacrificing performance. And now, whether this is a direct consequence of the Honda power unit just being underdeveloped or a consequence of the strict packaging demands that Newey has imposed on them, is yet to be determined. It's almost laughably sad to think that this has now happened to Fernando Alonso twice, because it's impossible not to draw comparisons to McLaren's disastrous pre-seasons with Honda in 2015 and 2017. Whilst there are lots of differences between all of these situations, it should be noted that Honda is a very different organization with very different leadership now. The lessons, however, that were learned have to be remembered for Aston Martin. Now, what doomed Honda at McLaren almost from day one was the toxic environment. McLaren's arrogance, which was led by Ron Dennis and also Fernando Alonso, was the undoing of the McLaren-Honda relationship. At every opportunity, McLaren pinned the blame on Honda, because they were adamant that their chassis, which in their eyes was capable of winning races, was simply being held back by Honda and Honda alone. McLaren didn't foster a collaborative environment where the two organizations in Britain and Japan could be honest with each other. In 2015, McLaren forced Honda to enter F1 early at a point where they clearly weren't ready. In trying to chase performance, McLaren also pushed the boundaries by designing a very tightly packaged car which was dubbed at the time the size 0. Now, that in itself is not bad because this is Formula 1. You should be pushing the boundaries. But they massively misjudged Honda's capabilities as a brand new engine manufacturer and either didn't consult them on whether they would be able to deliver a competitive power unit within their constraints, or they just didn't care and expected Honda to just get it done out of arrogance. It's also important to remember that when it comes to some of the rhetoric, that Alonso himself was complicit in this arrogance as well and was always shifting blame towards Honda throughout multiple seasons. He kept on talking up McLaren's chassis, and his infamous GP2 engine radio message at the 2015 Japanese Grand Prix wasn't some accidental slip of the tongue in frustration. It was a calculated message to the entire world intended to embarrass Honda at their home Grand Prix. And now Honda were also not blameless, and they deserved criticism. But when McLaren finally ditched Honda in favor of the Renault power unit for 2018, which was winning races in the Red Bull, they expected for that to vindicate them, when in fact it did the exact opposite. In 2018, McLaren and Alonso were humbled with a race-winning power unit that left them with no excuses. They had yet another underwhelming season, and at the center of their failure was a bad chassis that couldn't even compete in the midfield. It didn't fully vindicate Honda, because again that would imply that Honda bore no responsibility whatsoever, but it made everyone reassess the proportion of blame during the McLaren-Honda partnership. In the post-McLaren era, Honda went on to enormous success with Red Bull. In 2019, they won multiple races during their very first season together. And I have always loved the fact that as a sign of respect, during their debut win in Austria, the very first thing that Max Verstappen did when he went on the podium was point straight to the Honda logo. It was a small gesture that did a lot to repair Honda's credibility, and it also gave McLaren a slap in the face. From there, even though Honda officially announced they would leave at the end of 2021 due to the power unit development freeze from 2022 onwards, Red Bull continued to operate with Honda power units, and collectively they would power Max Verstappen to every single one of his world titles. Ironically, during Verstappen's dominance, arguably the best aspect of the Honda power unit was its impeccable reliability. That legacy of Honda deciding to leave at the end of 2021 and then changing their minds when they announced their return with Aston Martin in 2023 is partly why their power unit now is so undeveloped even compared to the other brand new power unit manufacturers in Red Bull, Ford and even Audi, who were developing their power units going back all the way to 2022. And now, although Fernando was able to mend fences with Honda after a very toxic time at McLaren, and there is no doubt that I think looking back, he probably regrets how far he went with some of his criticism. I do fear that even in Bahrain we were starting to hear a similar rhetoric to that from the McLaren days in terms of the team actually having a good chassis and all of their problems being solely down to Honda. The power unit. It's a little bit more difficult because we don't have the good understanding yet on the regulations and what is needed. But on the chassis side, there is no question mark on that. After 30 plus years Adrian dominating the sport, it's not that he will forget everything in 1 year. Unlike when Honda were with McLaren, the cost cap now strictly prevents the teams and engine manufacturers from simply throwing endless money at the problem to find a solution. Luckily, however, there are mechanisms that under the rules will allow Honda to catch up. Even though the final specification for the engines has already been submitted and locked in, the FIA can give suppliers dispensation for reliability-related upgrades. As for performance, to stop a repeat of the dominance that we saw in 2014, the FIA have created the Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities Rule, which is known as ADO for short. If the FIA deemed that a power unit is at a significant disadvantage under its current specification, then again they can give dispensation to a manufacturer to bring performance upgrades to catch up. The bottom line is that whilst Aston Martin Honda has time, Fernando Alonso doesn't. It seems cruel that his reunion with Honda seemed to have picked up exactly where it left off, and how he handles this situation differently compared to what happened with McLaren will be very interesting to watch. I have no doubt that Aston Martin, with how high the rate of development is going to be to start the season, are going to improve. I do not expect for them to finish the season either on track or in the championship behind Cadillac, because they have all of the resources, facilities, and people to get themselves out of this mess. But the dream of Fernando landing in a race-winning car for the very last time before he eventually bows out of the sport, it looks to be just that right now, a dream. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.